I knew something in my life had shattered the moment my daughter-in-law closed the car door and walked away, leaving me on the cold steps of a place meant to silence people like me. They thought age made me weak, easy to erase, easy to reshape into whatever suited their plans. But betrayal has a sound, quiet at first, then sharp enough to split a life in two. And on the day I was abandoned, clutching nothing but a pillow and the last pieces of my dignity, I had no idea a single act of kindness toward a stranger would become the thread that pulled my entire truth back into the light. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're tuning in from. We love seeing how our stories connect people from all around the world. Your comments and thoughts bring this community to life, and we're so grateful to have you on this journey with us. If you have not already, do not forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now, grab a cozy seat, maybe a cup of coffee or tea, and prepare yourself for a tale that will captivate your heart from beginning to end. Let us begin. My name is Evelyn Carter, and at 72 years old, I have learned that a quiet morning can either steady a person or warn her of storms she cannot yet see. Most days in my little house on the edge of the Savannah River begin the same way. I fill the kettle, open the curtains to the moving silver water outside, and let the soft light spill over the wooden floors that my husband, George, polished every spring. The familiar creak of the window frame and the faint scent of magnolia drifting through the screen make me feel as though life is still orderly, still mine to shape. I walk from room to room, touching objects the way some people greet old friends. A framed photograph from our 20th anniversary. A quilt I stitched decades ago. The blue wool scarf George gave me on our 40th year together. Each piece holds its own gravity. That scarf rests now on the back of the armchair he once claimed as his reading throne. Its color has faded slightly, but the softness remains. When I brush my fingertips across it, memories lift like dust motes in a sunbeam. I remember George's laughter, low and warm. I remember the way his hands wrapped around mine on our last winter evening, promising that I would never face the world alone. Those memories soothe me, but they also hollow me out in ways I cannot explain. Grief has an odd shape. It presses and lifts all at once. My home has become a museum of the life we built. The walnut dining table where family stories grew louder with every meal, the shelves lined with albums holding decades of birthdays and graduations, even the chipped teapot we brought back from a roadside market on our honeymoon. Everything inside these walls feels alive with the history of who I have been. That is why I cling to it. When a person reaches my age, her belongings are more than objects. They are proof. My son, Michael, understands some of that. At least he once did. He is my only child, steady and diligent, a civil engineer who spent his life repairing bridges while refusing to let cracks form in our relationship. His accident changed everything. The night the hospital called, a coldness took root in my chest. He survived, but the recovery has been slow, tangled with complications. Lydia, his wife, manages the updates. She decides when I can visit, how long I can stay, and what information I'm allowed to hear. I tell myself she means well, but there are moments when her smile tightens like a knot, and I sense something colder beneath it. Savannah is a beautiful place, but beauty can isolate. The brick streets, the ruffled moss swaying from ancient branches, the slow drawl of church bells along the riverfront, all echo around me in long, lonely waves. When the doorbell rang that morning, I felt the smallest pull in my stomach. Lydia stood there, immaculate as always, with her hair perfectly curled and a stack of papers gripped tightly in her hand. She did not greet me with warmth. She did not ask how I slept. She walked inside without waiting to be invited, and for the first time I noticed she examined my home not with affection, but with assessment. She placed the papers on my dining table. The sound was sharp, a small crack in the calm of my morning. Something inside me shifted. I could not name it then, but I felt the air change, the way the river sometimes changes direction when the tide pulls too hard. I stood very still, watching her, sensing that whatever was written in that stack would alter the course of my life. I did not yet know how deeply or how painfully, but the unease settled into my bones and refused to leave. If you are still watching, and this moment struck something in you, please comment number 1 below to let me know you are with me. Now let us move on to chapter 2. I realized something had shifted the moment Lydia stood in my doorway with that stack of papers pressed against her pristine blazer. She did not greet me with warmth or even courtesy. She simply stepped inside as though the house already belonged to her and placed the documents on my dining table as if presenting evidence in a case I had not known I was part of. Her voice carried a polished gentleness that did not match the hardness in her eyes when she explained that I would be moving temporarily for the sake of Michael's recovery. She framed it as a necessity, not a suggestion, and I felt my stomach tighten at the way the decision seemed to have been made long before she arrived. She spoke of rest and quiet and medical recommendations, insisting that Michael needed peace to heal. I knew my son's condition was fragile, but I had never imagined that my presence or my home could be considered a threat to his well-being. Still, Lydia's words pressed against me like cold hands, leaving no room for question. She had already selected the place, already completed the paperwork, and already resolved any doubt she anticipated from me. Harbor View Care Center. She described it as a bright, engaging community not far from the river, a place where I would have companionship and activities to fill my time. But I had never mentioned needing such a place. I had never consented to leave my home. When she led me to her car, everything happened too quickly for my mind to process. I packed only a pillow, a sweater, and a small bag of toiletries. Every meaningful object remained behind. The albums, the scarf, the quilt, even George's chair. As the door closed, I felt as though the house inhaled without me, storing the silence for the moment I might never return. I looked back at the steps, memorizing each brick, each worn edge, each detail that rooted me to the life I had built. The drive felt longer than it should have. Savannah passed by in a blur of moss-covered branches and iron-wrought balconies. When we pulled into the parking lot of Harbor View, the first thing I noticed was how different it looked from Lydia's description. The paint peelings on the exterior walls, the dull metallic sign half hidden behind overgrown shrubs, the cracked pavement beneath my shoes. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant and the faint sourness of institutional neglect. A fluorescent bulb flickered against the ceiling, humming with a relentless vibration that made my temples ache. A weary receptionist slid forms toward me without meeting my eyes. When I reached for my purse to retrieve my identification, my hand froze. My house keys were gone. I searched every pocket, every fold of fabric, but the ring was nowhere. A cold wave rose up my spine as I remembered Lydia standing close behind me earlier, the strange gentleness with which she touched my shoulder. Losing those keys felt like losing the last barrier between my life and whatever waited for me here. Later, in a moment of escape from the stale air inside, I stepped out onto the concrete steps. That was when I saw him. A man in an old coat, thin with exhaustion, sitting on a bench near the entrance. The wind tugged at his sleeves. Something in his stillness drew me toward him, and without thinking, I removed the blue scarf from my bag, the one possession I had insisted on bringing, and placed it gently in his hands. His gratitude was quiet, and when he called me Mrs. Carter, a ripple of confusion brushed through me. I had not spoken my name. Back in my room, the single bed and a metal dresser greeted me like relics from a place where the comfort was not meant to exist. I sat on the edge of the mattress and stared through the window. Out by the lot, the man stood beneath a street lamp, my scarf a flicker of color against the dimness. For a moment, he looked up toward me, and the certainty settled deep in my bones. Whatever this place was, whatever Lydia had done, nothing about it was accidental. If you are still here, and the tension is starting to build for you too, comment number 2, so I know you are following closely. Now, let us continue to Chapter 3. I woke on my 4th morning at Harbor View to the brittle sound of the landline ringing in the hallway. No one ever called for me, so at first I tried to ignore it. But when the nurse handed me the receiver and said it was someone asking for Evelyn Mercer specifically, a strange heaviness settled in my chest. The caller introduced himself as the owner of a small antique shop in my old neighborhood, asking if I truly wanted to sell the walnut dining table my husband and I had purchased the year we married. I felt the room tilt slightly. That table was the heart of our home, polished by decades of shared meals and memories. I managed to say that there must be a mistake. The man apologized, confused, explaining that Lydia had delivered the piece the previous afternoon, saying I had approved it. I sat down slowly on the edge of my narrow bed, a throb beginning behind my eyes. The first real understanding broke over me like cold rain. Something was being taken from me piece by piece while I was tucked away here. I found Lydia during visiting hours, her expression collected, her tone as clipped as always. She insisted the sale was necessary, claiming rising medical costs needed attention. What little she said carried no warmth, only practiced confidence. I listened, quiet and frightened, realizing she had always intended to take control once my son became too weak to question her decisions. The next blow came not from Lydia, but from the facility itself. A staff member left a small prescription bottle on my tray during lunch, saying Dr. Hammond wanted me to begin a medication to help with adjustment issues. I read the label and felt a sharp instinctive alarm. Haloperidol, a drug meant to silence people, not heal them. I slipped it beneath my folded sweater without comment. Nothing about this place matched the promotional brochure Lydia had shown me weeks earlier. Harbor View itself reinforced that same unease. Residents wandered unattended, their eyes reflecting the kind of loneliness that seeps into the bones. The air smelled of bleach layered over mildew. The staff smiled only when supervisors were near. I met Dorothy in the corridor that afternoon, her posture straight and her eyes sharp. She had the look of someone who watched everything. She did not speak much, but the way she lowered her voice to warn me about misplaced trust felt like a hand gripping my arm in the dark. Later, when I stepped outside for supervised fresh air, I saw Daniel again. He stood near the fence line, leaning slightly as though he had been waiting. He lifted his chin in a small acknowledgement that made something inside me steady for the first time in days. His presence did not feel accidental. It felt like someone keeping watch. His quiet warning, spoken with calm certainty, stirred the instinct to protect what was left of my life. That night, I began writing in a small notebook, documenting every strange conversation, every unexplained action by the staff, every unsettling detail. It was a fragile form of armor, but it was mine. As I wrote, I heard Lydia's voice echo faintly from the hallway, speaking into her phone about accelerating the listing of my house. The betrayal folded sharply into my chest. I realized then that this was not confusion or circumstance. It was a plan. When I finally turned off the lamp, the corridor outside glowed with a dim golden light that stretched like a warning across the floor. I clutched the notebook to my chest, aware that I had crossed a threshold. I was no longer simply surviving the fallout of someone else's choices. I was preparing for a battle I had never imagined would involve my own family. If the twists are keeping you on edge and you want to see what comes next, drop a number 3 in the comments. Now let us step into Chapter 4. Each morning at Harbor View had begun to feel like waking inside a narrowing corridor, but on this particular day, I resolved that I would not remain quiet any longer. The discovery that my dining table had been sold without my permission had settled into my chest like a stone that would not move. I needed answers, and I needed to reclaim whatever pieces of my life were still within reach. I began by approaching the younger staff members, hoping they might offer simple procedural information. Yet each question I asked was met with the same expression, a brief flicker of discomfort followed by a rehearsed explanation. It was as if they had been instructed to avoid telling residents anything of substance. I noticed how some refused to meet my eyes, as though knowledge itself was dangerous here. Later that afternoon, I requested a formal meeting with the facility administrator, Mrs. Keating. Her office was painted a stale beige and smelled faintly of citrus cleaner, a scent that did little to hide the underlying odor of mold. She greeted me with polite detachment, the kind one reserves for a guest who has overstayed their welcome. I explained my concerns, choosing each word with care so that my voice would not tremble. She scribbled a few notes, though her pen hardly touched the page. Her responses were flat and patterned, crafted to reassure without revealing anything meaningful. When I stood to leave, I knew nothing would change. In her eyes, I was not an adult capable of making decisions, but a file number to be maintained. As the hours passed, my desperation to reach my son grew. I approached the front desk and requested permission to call the hospital. The staff member informed me that due to recent updates in my records, any communication regarding my son had to be handled through my designated guardian. The word guardian echoed in my mind like an accusation. No one had asked for my consent. No one had explained how such a designation had even been assigned. For the first time since my arrival, I felt the undeniable truth that Lydia was tightening control in ways I had not yet fully understood. In a moment of quiet determination, I slipped into the laundry corridor where an old payphone hung crookedly on the wall. I dialed the hospital, my fingers shaking slightly. A nurse confirmed that Michael had made progress and that he had been asking for me repeatedly. The nurse hesitated before adding that she had been told I did not wish to visit. Those words struck harder than anything Lydia had done so far. The lie was not only cruel, it was designed to sever the most important bond I had left. That evening, I sought out Dorothy, whose guarded manner suggested she knew more about Harborview than anyone admitted. Through fragmented comments and quiet warnings, she revealed unsettling patterns. Residents pressured to sign forms they did not understand, staff threatened into silence, inconsistent medical records. Nothing was specific, yet every detail hinted at a system built to exploit rather than protect. When Lydia arrived the next day, she carried the same polished smile, though her eyes held an edge sharper than before. After she left, I noticed a folder on the chair, as if forgotten. Inside were documents transferring ownership of my house to her name, complete with signatures I had never provided. My breath caught as the magnitude of her intentions became painfully clear. Later, outside in the pale afternoon light, I saw Daniel again. His gaze held steady as he murmured that I was closer to the truth than I realized. It was not a threat, but a confirmation. Someone was paying attention, and that someone understood exactly what was unfolding. That night, I gathered my notes, each entry a small piece of the larger puzzle. I stared out the window at the distant headlights moving along the highway. I felt fear, yes, but for the first time I also felt resolve. I had been pushed into a corner, but I was no longer standing still. I was preparing to fight. If you are feeling the pressure rising and cannot look away now, leave a number 4 in the comments. Next, we are heading straight into Chapter 5. The morning began with an uneasiness that clung to the air like fog. The hallways at Harborview were quieter than usual, but not in a peaceful way. Aid workers moved with hurried steps, whispering in corners, their faces drawn tight with something unspoken. Doors that were normally left open were now shut, and several residents who usually wandered freely had been instructed to remain inside their rooms. The tension was so thick, it felt as if the building itself were holding its breath. I sensed that whatever had been simmering beneath the surface was finally rising. Before breakfast ended, a nurse approached and informed me that I was needed in the administrator's office for a routine reassessment of my cognitive status. The phrasing was polite, but the intent behind it pulsed with threat. I understood that this was part of the plan Lydia had been building piece by piece, to deem me mentally unfit and secure complete control. As I followed the nurse down the corridor, a chill formed deep in my spine. The walls felt narrower with each step. Inside the office, I was seated on a stiff wooden chair facing a small panel that included Administrator Keating, Dr. Hammond, and an unfamiliar social worker who avoided meeting my gaze. The questions began almost immediately. They asked about the date, the day of the week, the last meal I had eaten, details about conversations I was certain they knew I remembered clearly. Yet the phrasing of every question felt intentional, crafted to push me toward confusion. Dr. Hammond watched me closely, waiting for any sign of hesitation. I realized this was not an assessment. It was a trap disguised as protocol. As the questioning intensified, the office door opened abruptly. Lydia entered with the air of someone confident she owned the room. Her heels clicked sharply against the linoleum, slicing through the silence. She announced that she had filed a petition with the county court to become my legal guardian. The word struck me like an icy blade. The betrayal was not merely emotional now. It was becoming a legal reality, one that could strip me of every remaining choice. The panel listened to her as if she were the only person whose voice mattered. Moments later, I learned that my status had been changed to special supervision. This meant restricted movement, limited contact, and the possibility of forced medication. The room spun slightly as the enormity of it settled over me, but I forced myself to remain still. I refused to give them the reaction they sought. Instead, I spoke with deliberate clarity, choosing each sentence with the precision of someone fighting for her own mind. For a moment, I saw uncertainty flicker across the social worker's face. It gave me a small sliver of strength. Then, without warning, the door opened again. Daniel stepped in, no longer wearing the weathered coat or the faint disguise of hardship. He carried himself with an authority that reshaped the entire room. His posture was straight, his expression controlled, and the badge clipped inside his jacket revealed the truth he had kept hidden. A retired military investigator. The quiet stranger on the bench was now a force that disrupted every assumption the staff had made. He placed a document on the table, a federal order requiring the facility to suspend all evaluations and interventions regarding my care. The reaction was instant. Administrator Keating blanched, Dr. Hammond stiffened, and Lydia's polished composure shattered for the first time since I had known her. Daniel's voice remained steady as he stated that Harbor View was under investigation for unethical treatment and financial misconduct. He did not elaborate, but he did not need to. His presence alone undermined the entire charade. As I watched the room unravel, something in me finally ignited. The helplessness that had weighed on me for weeks lifted, replaced by a fierce clarity. I looked directly at Lydia, truly seeing her for the first time without the filter of hope or denial. Every lie, every manipulation, every theft of my memories and rights sharpened into a single truth. She had never intended to protect me. She had intended to erase me. I rose from the chair slowly, not in defiance, but in reclamation. Whatever came next, I knew that the tide had turned. I was no longer the woman they expected to silence. When the chaos of the morning finally ebbed, I returned to my room with a heaviness that made every step feel uncertain. The confrontation in the administrator's office still pulsed in my chest, a mixture of terror and relief that left me trembling. Daniel's intervention had stopped the spiral for the moment, but the danger surrounding me did not vanish. The air inside Harbor View felt even more oppressive now, as if the building resented the disruption. I sat on the edge of my bed and tried to steady my breathing, reminding myself that although I had been rescued, I was not yet safe. I realized the path forward would require choices I had been avoiding since the day Lydia left me here. In the quiet of the room, the entire chain of events unfolded in my mind with painful clarity. Lydia's cold insistence that I needed full-time care, the hurried packing that stole my belongings, the forced pills I never swallowed, the blocked attempts to reach my son, the lies that had wrapped themselves around my life until I could barely recognize it. Each memory came with the sting of betrayal. I finally understood that none of this had been a misunderstanding. Lydia had planned every step with deliberate cruelty, and my silence had been her greatest advantage. That silence could not continue. Late in the afternoon, Daniel appeared at my door. His presence carried the same quiet authority as before, but now there was an urgency beneath it. He guided me to a secluded corner of the courtyard, away from the windows where staff often watched. He explained that the order he presented earlier was only temporary. The facility could still find ways to maneuver around it. He needed my help, not simply as a victim, but as a witness. He told me that without my cooperation, the investigation would lose essential pieces. Every detail I had recorded, every observation in my notebook, could become the backbone of a case strong enough to dismantle the corruption festering inside Harbor View. His words forced me to confront the choice in front of me, a choice I had known was coming. If I agreed to help, I would be stepping directly into the storm. Lydia would not hesitate to retaliate. The facility could tighten its control. But if I refused, I would lose everything: my home, my name, my independence, and perhaps even my son. I thought of my husband, of the house he had worked so hard to build for us, of the memories carved into every corner of it. I knew I could not let those memories be stolen or twisted for the sake of someone else's greed. Then Daniel revealed something that shook me deeper than everything before. Lydia had been contacting a judge she knew, pushing to accelerate the guardianship request. She was spreading the same lie she had used to isolate me, that I was confused, unstable, unable to think clearly. I felt a wave of nausea as I imagined her signing papers on my behalf, controlling not only my assets but the choices surrounding my son's recovery. Michael, who had asked for me repeatedly, who believed I had abandoned him. The thought hardened something inside me. I told Daniel I would help. The words came slowly but with certainty. I handed him my notebook, promising to document even the smallest shift in atmosphere. He placed a small recording device in my hand, lighter than a coin but heavy with purpose. I was to act compliant, keep my head down, and gather everything I could. Fear and resolve braided together inside me, forming a strength I almost did not recognize. That night, I stood before the window, the glow of the parking lot light stretching across the glass like fractured beams of hope. I held the recorder in one hand and my notebook in the other. I'd chosen my path. It would not be easy, but it was the only way left to reclaim the life Lydia had tried to erase. If you are still with me, and the story has you holding your breath, type number 6 below to let me know you are following every turn. Now we continue to Chapter 7. The day after Daniel intervened, Harbor View felt different in a way that cut straight through the skin. The tension was no longer subtle. It lived in the corners of the hallways, in the stiffened posture of the staff, in the tight whispers exchanged when they thought no one was listening. The building's routines did not change on the surface, but everything underneath felt altered. The workers moved quickly, avoiding eye contact with me as if I carried something contagious. The residents, usually eager for conversation, now kept their voices low, sensing that something unseen had shifted. I realized that the administration no longer viewed me simply as a resident. I had become a threat. The retaliation began quietly. Breakfast arrived later than usual, and when it did, the tray was cold. Requests for assistance were met with long pauses or the kind of silence meant to wear a person down. One aide intentionally returned my laundry damp and wrinkled, leaving it in a pile at the foot of my bed. The small indignities stacked upon each other like stones, each one designed to remind me that they controlled my environment. I refused to react, but the contempt in their gestures seeped into me, soaking my nerves with unease. I soon discovered something far more alarming. When a folder was accidentally left on the medication cart, I recognized my name and lifted the corner of the top page. Inside were notes falsely stating that I refused to cooperate with staff, that I displayed confusion about dates, that I spoke to imagined individuals. None of it was true. The lies were written in crisp handwriting, meant to appear professional. I felt a cold wave sweep over me as I understood the purpose. If they recorded these falsehoods often enough, they could justify anything they wished to do. That afternoon, I was informed that a reassignment had been made and that I was being transferred to the high supervision wing. The hallway leading there felt narrower, the air stagnant and heavy. The lighting was dimmer, as if sunlight had been intentionally shut out. Doors were reinforced with extra locks, and the windows looked out onto nothing but a concrete courtyard. It was a place built to contain, not to comfort. As the door clicked shut behind me, the reality of my isolation settled deep into my bones. The absence of Dorothy hit me next. She did not appear at dinner. She did not show up in the common area. When I asked a staff member, she pretended not to hear the question. The evasion spoke more loudly than any answer could have. I feared Dorothy had been silenced for speaking too openly, and the thought of her alone somewhere in the building made my chest tighten. Daniel attempted to reach me, but the moments were brief and scattered. I would see him only in passing, catching a slight nod under the brim of his cap. He managed to whisper that the pressure from the facility was increasing and that they were working aggressively to obstruct the investigation. His alarm confirmed what I already knew. For now, I had to rely on myself. Then came the envelope from the county courthouse. Inside was the formal notice that Lydia had filed a petition to request full guardianship over my life. The paper trembled in my hands as I read it. The legal system had now entered the battlefield, extending Lydia's reach far beyond the walls of Harbor View. For a moment, despair pressed against me so heavily that I feared it would flatten me entirely. My shoulders ached, my eyes burned, and every part of me felt brittle. But as I sat alone in the dimly lit room, I opened my notebook. The pages filled with my handwriting reminded me that I still had truth on my side. It was a small anchor, but it held. As night fell, I stood at the narrow window, staring at the empty parking lot beyond the fence. The darkness felt thick, but I did not crumble beneath it. My fingers closed around the notebook. It remained my one weapon, fragile yet powerful. And as I held it, I knew I was not finished, not even close. The days inside the high supervision wing drained my strength more quickly than I expected. The isolation pressed on my chest like a steady weight, and the dim lighting made it difficult to tell morning from afternoon. Yet somewhere within that exhaustion, a strange clarity began to form. I could no longer afford to let fear immobilize me. Every moment of hardship had sharpened my awareness, carving out a space where determination could take root. Early one morning, when the halls were unusually still, I spread my notebook across my lap and reviewed the entries I had written since arriving at Harbor View. I read each line carefully, Notes about the medication I had refused to swallow, observations about the staff's shifting behavior, the day Dorothy confided in me, the changes in my file that suggested I was confused or hallucinating, the forced move into the high supervision wing. As I traced my handwriting across the page, I saw the story forming with undeniable structure. Everything that had happened to me was part of a larger pattern. Seeing it laid out so clearly turned my fear into something steadier, like a hand gripping my spine and holding me upright. Later that afternoon, Daniel found a brief opportunity to approach me. The meeting took place behind the courtyard wall, shielded from the windows. His presence brought a flicker of relief. He updated me quickly, telling me that Administrator Keating had hired legal counsel to slow the investigation. Even so, the evidence building against the facility was now stronger because of my documentation. Hearing that made the weeks of fear feel less wasted, as though every injustice I had endured had a purpose. Daniel then revealed something far more personal. He had traced suspicious activity in my financial records and discovered that Lydia had been siphoning small amounts of money long before I entered Harbor View. The gradual transfers painted a picture of someone preparing a long-term plan rather than reacting impulsively. I felt a coldness settle beneath my ribs. This betrayal had begun long before Michael's accident, and I had been blind to it. For the first time since this ordeal began, I proposed a plan of my own. I told Daniel I wanted him to help me send a message to Michael. A few words, nothing more, but enough for him to know I had not abandoned him. Daniel hesitated, weighing the risks, yet he agreed that Michael's awareness could shift the balance. He promised to find a way. Then came a revelation that lifted me more than I expected. Daniel said Lydia had gone to the hospital demanding authority over Michael's decisions, but Michael had begun to question her intentions. He was improving, more alert, and suspicious of the story she had woven around my absence. For the first time in weeks, hope did not feel like a fragile thing. Before Daniel left, I handed him my notebook. It felt like giving away a part of my spine, but I knew the evidence needed to be outside these walls before anyone could destroy it. Daniel accepted it with a seriousness that told me he understood its weight. In return, he reminded me to remain calm, to appear compliant, and to observe everything inside the high supervision wing. The investigation was moving forward, but I needed to protect myself until outside help could break through. Before Daniel left, I handed him my notebook. It felt like giving away a part of my spine, but I knew the evidence needed to be outside these walls before anyone could destroy it. Daniel accepted it with a seriousness that told me he understood its weight. In return, he reminded me to remain calm, to appear compliant, and to observe everything inside the high supervision wing. The investigation was moving forward, but I needed to protect myself until outside help could break through. After he slipped away, I sat in the stillness of my room. The notebook was gone, yet I felt more anchored than before. I placed a hand over my chest, imagining its weight still there. I was not powerless. I was preparing. And somewhere beyond the locked doors and narrow windows, my son was waiting for the truth. If you are ready to see how everything comes together from here, comment number 8, so I know you are still watching. Now, let us move toward the final chapters and the outcome of this journey. The morning began with an unsettling stillness, the kind that felt too heavy to be ordinary. I lay awake in my small room at Harbor View Senior Residence, listening to distant sounds that did not belong to the usual routine. There were firm footsteps in the hallway, the low rumble of engines outside, and voices clipped with urgency. When I sat up, the air itself felt charged, as if the entire building was holding its breath. Soon, staff members hurried from room to room, their usual indifference replaced with nervous energy. We were guided toward the main hall, told to wait there without explanation. From a narrow window near the end of the corridor, I caught sight of several law enforcement vehicles aligned across the front lot. Men and women in uniform moved in precise formation, entering through the main doors with purposeful strides. Something was unfolding, something long overdue. My heart thudded in my chest when I saw him. Daniel stepped inside with the investigative team, no longer disguised beneath worn boots and weathered layers. His true presence was striking, composed, authoritative, eyes sharp with focus. Seeing him like that made everything that had happened in the past weeks shift into clarity. He was not the quiet wanderer on a bench anymore. He was a man here to end what should never have begun. A female federal agent approached me, calling my name with measured calm. I followed her to a small room once used for family visits. The door closed gently behind us, and a moment later, Daniel entered. For the first time, his shoulders seemed to loosen when his eyes met mine. He told me the investigation had reached its breaking point, that the notebook I had kept had become the final piece they needed. Lydia had been arrested earlier that morning at the hospital for multiple charges, including financial exploitation of the elderly, forgery, and wrongful confinement. Hearing those words did not bring triumph, only a deep exhale I had been holding far too long. The truth was no longer something I begged to be heard. It was something proven. Daniel also told me that my son, Michael, had fully regained consciousness. He had learned everything. He was asking for me. They had arranged for me to leave immediately under official supervision, ensuring Lydia could no longer interfere with either of our lives. As I walked through the back exit of Harbor View, I looked once at the building that had tried to swallow my voice. It was no longer a cage. It was simply a place behind me. Daniel opened the door of the waiting vehicle and assured me I was safe now. As we drove toward the hospital, my fear eased into something fragile but real, the beginning of hope. When I reached Michael's hospital room, the world felt softer than it had in weeks. The harsh fluorescent lights of Harbor View were gone, replaced by warm daylight spilling in through the tall windows. I stepped inside quietly, unsure of how my son would react after everything he had learned. But when he looked up and saw me, the guilt in his eyes was eclipsed by something deeper, relief. His hand reached for mine, and the moment our fingers touched, I felt the weight of the ordeal finally loosen its grip on both of us. We did not speak much. We did not need to. The silence between us held more truth than words ever could. I felt his unspoken apology, his lingering fear of having failed me, and his determination to never let anyone come between us again. I offered him the only response that mattered, my presence. My being there meant I had survived, and he understood that. Sitting beside his bed, I found myself reflecting on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the fear, the slow erosion of dignity, and the unexpected strength that rose from it. I realized that age does not make anyone invisible, though the world tries hard to convince us otherwise. We still hold our stories, our instincts, our ability to resist those who mean us harm. I had been pushed into a corner, but I had not stayed there. As I left the hospital room later that day, a sense of clarity stayed with me. The small act of kindness I had shown Daniel on that cold afternoon had set everything in motion. It reminded me that goodness, even when it feels insignificant, can change the shape of a life. I walked out into the fresh air with a steady heart. I was not defeated. I was not forgotten. I was free. In the quiet that follows every storm, there comes a moment when the heart finally understands what the struggle was trying to teach. Hardship has a way of stripping life down to its bare truths, revealing what cannot be taken, forged, or manipulated. The resilience of the human spirit, the quiet power of dignity, and the enduring strength that rises when everything else falls away. Even in the darkest places, a single act of kindness can open the door to freedom, reminding us that goodness is never wasted. It travels, it echoes, and often returns when we need it most. Thank you for walking through this journey. If this story stirred something in you or reminded you of your own strength, I would love to hear your thoughts.